Hi, everybody. This is 4 Years of FACT, a reflexive mixed methods analysis of research contributions, shortcomings, and future prospects. Our project set out to understand the research topics, values, and community norms within FACT. In doing so, we hope to spark new thinking about what FACT is and what FACT ought to be. The unusual thing about our research project is that it is self-referential. Our group of researchers consists mostly of FACT affiliates, and our paper is being written for FACT while also being about FACT. So the question is, how can we reflect on FACT as members ourselves and in a paper that appears in the FACT proceedings? To answer this question, we attempt to take a reflexive approach to FACT. Reflexivity is a concept in social theory that refers to the consideration of our own social, cultural, and intellectual contexts and their role in shaping our scholarly field. Pierre Bourdieu emphasized the central importance of reflexivity in scholarly research. In particular, he argues for, quote, objectifying the subject of objectification, end quote. Now, what does that mean? For Bourdieu, it means deploying all the instruments available to us as researchers, including statistical surveys and other quantitative and qualitative research methods, to reveal assumptions and presuppositions in our scholarship. In this study, we take Bourdieu's invitation and we deploy numerous mixed empirical methods to better understand FACT. In particular, we're interested in 4 critical pillars within FACT: its themes, its values, its impact, and its community. To begin our reflexive work, I'll briefly comment on where we're coming from as researchers and the data we're drawing from. Starting with the authors of the present paper, the members of our group generally hold liberal and/or left-wing political views. We all have elite American academic affiliations. We represent multiple national origins and gender identities, and acknowledge that we have various privileges through our affiliation and institutional access. Our study's representation of FACT reflects those who self-selected to take our survey and those whose papers are accepted in FACT. In total, we draw from 60 survey responses and 212 papers. We also use citation network information from all papers one step away from FACT papers, which means either that they cite FACT papers or that they're cited by FACT papers. With that background in mind, now I'll summarize the various research methods we use to understand FACT themes, values, impact, and community. A central method in our analysis is a survey of FACT community members. The survey contained a mix of open-ended and quantitative questions. We sent the survey to all FACT authors and committee members, so I apologize for the spam, and we got 60 responses in all. Our respondents answered optional demographic questions, and we get a sense of who's being reflected. 75% of respondents marked that they had STEM expertise. At least 36 respondents have attended FACT, 39 have authored papers, 12 have served as organizing committee members, and 36 have reviewed for the conference. 67% of respondents stated that their political views are liberal when given 3 options: liberal, conservative, and libertarian, and notably 0 respondents marked conservative or libertarian. 41.8% of respondents said they belong to a disadvantaged or marginalized group. We want to express our gratitude to everybody who participated. The survey provided really rich quotes and perspectives that appear throughout our paper and throughout this talk. The next method is manual coding. We use manual coding to interpret open-ended survey responses and to analyze the themes of FACT papers. 2 members of our research team together read and coded every FACT paper to identify topics, domains, methods, and data sets. Coding allowed us to characterize which approaches are represented in FACT and which themes appear more or less frequently. Next, I'll discuss our quantitative methods, which complement our qualitative analyses. So first, we use topic modeling on the full text of the FACT publications corpus. We use LDA, or latent Dirichlet allocation. Our next quantitative method is community detection, which we performed on the set of FACT papers and also every paper one step away from a FACT paper. We use a variation of the Louvain community detection algorithm on 2 large-scale citation network datasets. First, Semantic Scholar Open Research Corpus, and second, A-minor citation network dataset. Finally, the last method I'll briefly discuss is the Moral Foundations Dictionary, which is a technical method based on the Moral Foundations theory. This dictionary is a way to estimate the set of moral assumptions underlying a body of text. It looks at the most common words and associates them with so-called moral foundations like fairness or care. This method helps us pinpoint the dominant values represented by FACT and potential alternative values and desiderata worth considering. So now I'll present some findings. There are a few findings in the paper. These are only a few of the findings in the paper, so I refer everyone to the paper for deeper analysis. For this slide, which I've crassly named FACT or FML, I'll talk about the role that fairness in machine learning or FML play at FACT. Our findings across methods suggest that fairness and machine learning are dominant central themes in FACT and receive the bulk of attention among topics. When we implement a topic model on the FACT publication corpus, our four most frequent topics are fairness and machine learning topics. Here, the orange shades signify the relative frequency of our set of found topics, where darker orange corresponds to more frequent topics. This finding aligns with our community detection algorithm, which found three large central communities that each combine fairness and ML. The first, labeled simply fairness and ML, is the most central community. And there are also large communities detected for bias in word embeddings and bias in vision. Now, why is this important? We as authors of this study aren't here to conclude that fairness in ML is over or undercovered. Instead, we're here to report empirical findings and sentiments about FACT back to the community. And when we look at the community's sentiments that surface in our open-ended survey questions, we do find that some community members hold the view that FACT has an overly narrow inquiry or overemphasizes fairness in ML. One community member stated, quote, "I don't think I've ever read a FACT paper that didn't in some way have to do with ML," end quote. Another community member warned that, quote, "technical/technocratic approaches to fairness offer a very narrow view of more broadly understood conceptions of fairness in law, policy, society," end quote. We believe it will be useful for FACT affiliates to reflect further on whether they believe FML is overemphasized, and if so, what topics they'd like to see more of. Through manual coding of FACT papers for their methods, topics, and data sets, our paper is able to report results on the relative frequency of methods and data sets. Here we report two highlights. First, methods tilt STEM, with the majority of papers coded as only STEM, not including STEM papers that were additionally coded with social, legal, humanistic, or other methods. The second finding on the right is that papers that use data sets overwhelmingly use so-called off-the-shelf data sets compared with original empirical data sets collected by the researchers. The most frequent three data sets used are adult, compass, and German credit. In exploring the methodologies and information sources that FACT relies on, we hope to give the community a better sense of the epistemology around FACT. These findings might help the community understand how knowledge gets developed and how beliefs become justified. When we went through and coded FACT papers for topics, we recorded the relative frequency of topics and subtopics among papers. In this figure, we show the frequency of subtopics among accountability papers. For every paper that was tagged as an accountability paper, we further assign one or more subtopics. The frequency axis represents the portion of accountability papers that receive each tag. Our finding is that accountability subtopics were not evenly distributed as we might expect. Professional codes and standards was the most common subtopic of accountability papers. Policy, governance, and regulation and marginalized perspective subtopics were least frequent. In our open-ended survey question, asking for community critiques and suggestions, some respondents shared views that FACT work could be co-opted by industry to make practices appear legitimate or might be over-focused on internal auditing. One respondent called on FACT to clarify that, quote, "FACT is not an auditing organization," end quote. Another respondent believed there is more overemphasis on certain industry-related topics. Quote, "It is easy for industry to adopt or co-opt some aspects of the work in ways which only minimally help those affected by algorithmic systems, and may even make them worse by giving them a false sense of legitimacy," end quote. We are reporting these views to the community because they add color and explanation to our quantitative findings. We also believe these topics are important to surface in light of our topic model, which detected that accountability as a topic in FACT publications, though not as dominant as fairness and ML, has steadily increased in frequency each year that FACT has existed. This suggests that accountability is a growing focus and increasingly relevant for FACT, and is becoming important to consider what values and approaches should constitute future accountability research. The next result I'll report has to do with the impact of FACT scholarship to date. These results will come from our survey of community members, and while there were a number of exciting results about which topics FACT community members believe have reached high intellectual merit and which FACT should prioritize in the future, we are just going to discuss one particular result for the sake of time. Here we show the community views on how FACT scholarship has impacted particular real-world domains. Respondents gave ratings on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, and we rank results in order from highest impact to lowest impact per our respondents' views. FACT members believe that criminal justice, hiring, and healthcare has had the highest impact to date, whereas FACT's impact on education is lower. We report these results to spark conversation. How might FACT improve its impact or apply its contributions more effectively to domains as important as education? More generally, it's probably important to get to the bottom of what impact should mean for FACT. Luckily, we thought of this question before making the slides for this presentation, so we were able to ask our respondents what they believe impact should mean for FACT. We coded the open-ended responses and got the following notions of impact. I won't read them aloud, but I put them on the slide. Now, for the remainder of the talk, I'm going to read a few responses to our open-ended survey questions about main criticisms of FACT and suggestions for improvement. It turns out FACT affiliates are really eager to talk about the major criticisms of FACT. I personally interpret the very animated responses not as an indication that people don't like FACT, but quite the opposite. People seem to really care about FACT and the direction that FACT is taking. So with that, I'll talk about a few of the major criticisms and suggestions that emerged from our responses. First up, we have the criticism that FACT is overly solution-oriented and focuses too much on incremental progress. One respondent stated that FACT has, quote, a tendency to not fundamentally question certain technologies or discuss what contexts they're inappropriate. Instead, it exhibits a tendency to incrementally improve such technologies, end quote. Another emergent criticism was overly Western and US-centric values. One respondent stated, quote, the conversation, in fact, often assumes a strong familiarity with a set of values and modes of discourse which are currently highly visible in the US, but much less so in non-Western countries, especially in other countries, especially non-Western countries. I urge the community to consider what can be done to make researchers who are not fluent in this specific type of discourse feel welcome and able to participate in the community, end quote. One emergent criticism was about negative sentiments towards STEM scholarship. A respondent stated, quote, I found myself in several situations where people would speak with true disdain towards engineers as though this was commonplace and normal, end quote. A major topic that came up in responses about criticisms of FACT concerned the influence of industry. I'll leave these quotes for the audience to read. In the way of suggestions, one quote at the very bottom of this slide suggested that there are generative ways to think about positive roles that industry can play in research communities. Another respondent suggested a variety of changes, including stricter funding disclosures and promoting craft. The last criticism I'll bring up today concerned ontology at FACT. The respondent stated, quote, FACT has not yet considered key ontological questions about the field, leading to incoherent use of key terms such as AI and algorithm, end quote. So now I'll end with a few broader takeaways and acknowledgements. In this study, my collaborators and I set out to analyze FACT researchers. Ultimately, some of the most crucial findings were contributed by the FACT researchers themselves, some of whom might be listening to this talk. There's something neat about the fact that this study set out to analyze FACT, and then members of FACT ended up majorly contributing and enabling the work. We think this is a great example of participatory reflexive research. One concluding point that we want to emphasize is that we, as authors of an empirical study, are not intending to put normative weight or express our own normative opinions on a particular finding, especially findings about how much emphasis is placed on certain topics or values over the years. All research communities choose to focus on some things more than others, and there may be good reason for the particular focuses within FACT. But all too often, community choices and priorities are not made consciously. Instead, priorities are emergent results stemming from the community's tastes, presumed values, or particular views that are represented at a given point in time. Our work tries to centrally communicate and reflect the values, themes, and priorities represented in FACT so that unconscious emergent phenomena can be brought to the attention of the community and can be more consciously and carefully considered. And to other academic communities out there, we hope that this participatory approach might serve as an example of reflexive research practices, especially for young scholarly fields. Lastly, on a more personal note, I'm very thankful to the community and to my collaborators for getting to work on this topic. I'm a first-year PhD student, and knowing that I wanted to join FAccT, this project felt like the perfect opportunity to get the lay of the land of a promising and exciting new scholarly field. I hope this project ignites discussion, and thanks again.